Words to begin from my colleague and friend Barbara Peskin. For the beauty of the earth, this spinning blue-green ball, yes. Gaia, mother of everything, we walk gently across your back to come together again in and from this place. To remember how we can live. To remember who we are. To create how we will be. Gaia, our home, the lap in which we live, welcome us. Welcome us as we welcome you wherever you may be this morning as we have gathered for worship once again in and from this place made sacred by generations of love, this place on the ancestral hillside and home of the Massachusetts and other native nations. Welcome. We begin. The outset of Ramadan, the holy season, is from the Sufi poet Rumi and our choir.
Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of weaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of weaving, ours is no caravan of despair. Come, yet again, come. Come, yet again, come.
We have indeed come. Our chalice lighting words this morning, shared from her home, Karen Churchill. Karen, thanks so much for the words this morning.
Thank you, Ken. A poem by Charles Gigney. What is a poem? A whisper, a shout, thought turns all inside out, a laugh, a sigh, an echo passing by, a rhythm, a rhyme, a moment caught in time, a moon, a star, a glimpse of who you are. I'd like to light the chalice in gratefulness for poetry in our lives.
Thank you, Karen. On this first Sunday of National Poetry Month, a poem with which to begin, and gratitude for poetry. Thank you. Our opening hymn is also from a poet. You're noticing a theme. John Greenleaf Whittier, Immortal Love, number 10 in your hardback hymn books.
Come,
and welcome again to worship from our old ship and in our old ship meeting house. My name is Reverend Ken Reed Brown. My pronouns are he and him and his. If you are new, whether here in the meeting house or on our Zoom link, we look forward to getting to know you and hope that you will come to know us, exploring on our website and, more importantly, falling into conversation with someone following worship or at any time. If there are any visitors or newcomers this morning, I would invite you, if you're here in the meeting house, to stand if you like and tell us who you are so that we can offer a warmer welcome. Please. Beth from Linden Ponds with a couple of Linden Pond friends. Good to have you with us this morning, Beth. Welcome. Nancy and Mike from Washington. All right. Well, it's becoming a regular thing then. Welcome. You want to say hello again? Well, it's so good to have you with us. We remember Jerry and Larry, so April, Deb, and Robert, welcome home. Welcome back this morning. The only announcements this morning have to do with what follows the service. Elizabeth Torrey and I will be leading kind of the introduction to our poetry class this spring. Whether or not you've signed up for the class, you're welcome to stay in the meeting house, stay on the Zoom. We'll be sharing a few poems from a couple of our poetry classes. This is a poetry retrospective this year from the, 16, 17 years? 15 years of poetry classes that we've offered. So we'll be sharing some poetry and kind of a forum conversation following the service. You're welcome as well to have fellowship time outside or across the street in our fellowship hall following the service. Once again, welcome. So our poetry for all ages this morning, and Elizabeth will be helping with this. So I will begin on this first Sunday of National Poetry Month, as you heard. We're going to begin our spoken poetry by sharing a few poems by children. And they come from a little book titled 10-Second Rain Showers, Poems by Young People. This was given to Susan and me years ago by Judy Hardy, our former and beloved music director. So in a section titled Black and Blue, Poems About Challenges, here's one by a fourth grader, James Swetnam, and it's titled Bullied. As I wait at the bus stop, my heart feels like stone. My spirit is out of me as a bully makes fun of me. I have no energy to fight back, but his work to put me down will never be complete. I love that. Fourth grader, his work to put me down will never be complete. And here's one by fifth grader Jill Soutier titled Wonder to My Eyes. I wonder if I could be what I want to be. I wonder if I could be as wonderful as I want. I wonder if the world won't pick on me anymore. I just want to be wonderful to my eyes. Yeah.
In the section titled When You're a Leaf, poems about nature and beauty, 10th grader Matt Miller wrote, Today the sun shines down hard, making it warm but chilly with the cool breeze that comes from nowhere. At this time of the year, spring and winter fight for custody of the seasons. And finally, here's Walking Through the Woods by 7th grader Dwayne Fisher. I was walking in the woods when the woods started walking with me. I love walking with the woods, and the woods love walking with me.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We come to our time of sharing joys, sorrows, and concerns. As I'm sharing any that you share here in the meeting house, I invite those of you who are on Zoom to enter a joy or a sorrow, concern into chat, and Dave William will read those after we hear what's been expressed here in the meeting house. As we have been doing and will continue to be doing, we light this first candle for the people of Ukraine and for peace. Anyone here in the meeting house have a joy or sorrow or concern to share? Bob. Thank you, Robert. A candle of joy for Steins being here, for your being here, and a candle of sorrow I appreciate for my retiring, and gratitude for whatever I may have done for your family. Thank you. Others? Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, Chris.
Candle of gratitude. Candle of gratitude for everyone in the Old Ship community that's reached out to me over the passing of my brother. Special thanks to Michael and Diane. I'm very appreciative to have them in my life. So, thank you.
I light that candle, Chris, and we send continued sympathy to you and all your family as you continue to grieve for the loss of your brother. We hold you. Anyone else? Yes. Ah. Well, a candle of gratitude for friendship over the course of 50 or so years. In this case, your friendship with Sharon, and after a few years later with Rick as well. Yes, gratitude for long friendships. Dave, oh yes, sorry, Stan, go ahead. Hmm. So a candle of gratitude for your friend Tatiana. She's been dealing with atrial fibrillation and is now doing better. No surgery needed, and this is good news. We hold her in our hearts. Anyone else in the meeting house? Daveline, are there any joys or sorrows or concerns from the chat?
Yes, there are. So Lauren Stein Falls would like to wish her sister April Stein an early happy birthday as she enters a new decade on the 20th of this month. So a candle for that. And I would like to light a candle for the joy of baseball opening this week. Go teams. And also a candle from
Oh, we know what
Claire.
you mean by that, Daveline.
I'm trying. And Claire has a candle of joy and gratitude for the wonderful Facing Death with Life class. Thanks to you all.
Thank you, Daveline. So for April's birthday, you've been outed, though she didn't say what decade it was, April. A candle burns for this birthday. Candle for baseball. Yes, we need this pastime diversion in all times. And oh goodness, I'm forgetting the last.
Claire's
Claire's
candle.
Claire's thanks for the Facing Death with Life class. Thanks which are due to Claire as well. Thank you. And these candles burn as well for any joys, sorrows, or concerns deeply felt in hearts among us, though they have remained unexpressed in words this morning. So we will sing. Are you going to be going out? Our youth and adults. Sierra, always good to see you, and Susan and Deb. Go now in peace. The road not taken.
God's kindness
And we enter a time of meditation, prayer, and silence. We're invited to settle mind, body, spirit, whatever paths, roads we have been walking that have led us here and now. And we settle mind, body, spirit. Perhaps not an easy thing to do during these days, but essential for the health of our spirits, to find a stillness, to reconnect to our heart's love as best we can, and to be reminded in the quiet stillness of our hearts that we are not alone, never have been, but are embraced by universal love and by one another. Yes, may we be still, settle, just breathe, nothing to do right now. Whatever is on our list can wait. We settle mind, body, spirit as we pray. Pray prayers of peace for the people of Ukraine, for all affected by this war, by all the wars on the planet, by violence anywhere. We pray prayers of peace. As we also hold in our hearts those who have expressed a sorrow or concern this morning, so that indeed no one among us feels alone in their sorrow or need. May we continue our meditations and prayers in contemplative silence. May it be renewing to our souls. first reading this morning will be shared by Diane Jordan, who is making her way to the front as I speak. Diane, thanks so much.
Our first reading this morning is The Place Where We Are Right by the Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. Here ends the reading.
Thank you, Diane. Our offering may be given, received, appreciated in a number of ways. As you leave, if you're here in the meeting house, as you leave, there's a basket in which you can place your offering at either exit. We do remind you that that has a ramp on this side, which is a little safer for anyone who feels uneasy with steps. You may also give your offering, whether you're here in the meeting house or online, at any time on our website, oldshipchurch.org. And there's a pull-down donate menu for our Sunday plate offering. And another option is the opportunity to give to our monthly outreach or special plate offering, which this month is to MCAN, the Massachusetts Climate Action Network. And next week we'll have someone from MCAN to tell us a little more about their work. But you may give to this worthy organization and effort at any time during the month. Thank you in advance for your generosity. Will there really be a morning? Will be our offertory.
If I were as
Emily Dickinson for those words, and this morning, thanks to Heather and Jackie, and of course, as always, to Christopher. Our readings, our first reading, Elizabeth will return to share the first of two more readings.
Imagine by John Lennon. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion, too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say, I'm just a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one. Imagine.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We've heard those words afresh through your reading. The next reading is from the poet Gary Snyder. He titled this, For the Children. The rising hills, the slopes of statistics lie before us, the steep climb of everything going up, up as we all go down. In the next century, or the one beyond that, they say, are valleys, pastures. We can meet there in peace if we make it. To climb these coming crests, one word to you and your children. Stay together, learn the flowers, go light. Stay together, learn the flowers, go light. Here ends the reading. And from Robert Frost, Oh, give us pleasure in the flowers today. Number 64 in your hymn book, number 64.
Give
So as you've heard, this is the beginning of National Poetry Month, and Elizabeth Torrey and I will be commencing our next class in a way after church today, but on Wednesday. If you haven't signed up and would like to, just send me an email. Our retrospective look at poetry. Some people love poetry. Some people think they don't and can never understand it. In that spirit, Billy Collins, perhaps along with Mary Oliver, America's two favorite poets these days, but Billy Collins wrote this in a poem titled Introduction to Poetry. So we imagine him in front of a class or something like this. Introduction to Poetry. I asked them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say, drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out. Or walk inside the poem's room and feel its walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. I think it was Robert Frost who once, when asked about the meaning of a poem, said, if I could tell you that, I wouldn't have had to write the poem. Poetry expresses a thought in a different way, in a different key, if you will. Now, in our poetry classes over the years, Elizabeth and I have never invited the torturing of a poem to find its meaning. We do not encourage tying poems to chairs. Rather, with Billy Collins, we invite the holding up a poem to the light, to exploring, to let the poem speak to us in whatever way it speaks to us. Certainly the way I read poetry, and this is why certain poems or a line or two from a poem stays with me, as perhaps it does you. John Lennon, we maybe don't think of John and Paul as poets so much, or George, but they were poets as well as amazing musicians. Imagine we heard that as a poem this morning, and it speaks directly to us. So lots of lines stick with us one way or another, whether from music, a poem that's been set to music. The ones that stay with me, poetry for my life, they're not just decoration for my life. Now, there's nothing wrong with a beautiful turn of phrase. We need the beauty. But the poems and lines that stay with me go yet deeper than a beautiful turn of phrase, giving delight, as it does. They stay with me with particular power and solace. I don't know about you, but during hard times, a poem can come back to us with particular power and even solace, whether the hard times are personal or global, right? So this morning, I'd like to share some of these lines, the poems that have been part of my life, with you. Perhaps one or two will stay with you. Perhaps some of them already are part of your lexicon of lines that are in your heart, wisdom lines, as Elizabeth often calls them, in your own journeys, through poetry and through life. For I hope that this will also serve as an invitation during these challenging times, worrisome times, even fearful times, to return to poetry if this is one of your sources of meaning and guidance and solace. Poetry for our lives. Now, if you've been listening to me for years, as some of you have, you won't be surprised that I begin, well, we've already begun, I guess, but next comes Walt Whitman, right? And these lines you've heard from me before. In fact, I asked Ralph Brown to read this passage a couple of weeks ago. You may remember in Song of Myself, Whitman said, "Why should I wish to see God better than this day? I see something of God each hour of the 24 and each moment. Then in the faces of men and women I see God, and in my own face in the glass I find letters from God dropped in the street, and every one is signed by God's name. And I leave them where they are, for I know that others will punctually come forever and ever." Now, why do these lines stay with me? Why have they stayed with me for something like 50 years? Talk about friendships of 50 years. I've been a friend of Walt's for that long. Why do they stay with me? Not because they somehow serve as a proof of God, because they don't. They're not that kind of, those are not those kinds of words. But for me, they affirm that whatever meaning, whatever ultimate or otherwise, that we're going to find in this life of ours, it will be found in each moment. The letters dropped along the roadside, the look in one another's eyes, whether our neighbors, whether right here and now or on the screen, our neighbors that were our neighbors' eyes, a child in Ukraine, wherever it might be, elsewhere. So these lines, like so much of the early Whitman, Song of Myself and much else, are a sort of wake-up call, it seems to me, a splash of cold water, fresh water, not like putting cold water on something, quite the other, a splash of fresh water to wake us up, wake the sleep out of my eyes so that we can see and feel the sacred in the midst of the so-called ordinary. But Walt began his career this way, never forsook that kind of wake-up call, but that's not how he ended, with only exuberant lines such as those. During his years of offering succor and comfort to soldiers wounded in the Civil War, in hospitals as he went from soldier to soldier, he wrote this, titled Reconciliation. Word over all, beautiful is the sky, beautiful that war and all its deeds of carnage must in time be utterly lost. That the hands of the sisters, death and night, incessantly, softly wash again and ever again this soiled world, for my enemy is dead. A man divine as myself is dead. I look where he lies, white-faced and still in the coffin. I draw near. I bend down and touch lightly with my lips the white face in the coffin. It is, you see, the universalism, the all-inclusiveness of Whitman. Not just lifting up the joy and awakening us to joy, but in the midst of sorrow and grief, joy and woe woven fine, as another poet, William Blake, put it. And it's this universalism that keeps me returning to Whitman's poetry. Whitman's contemporary, Emily Dickinson, conveyed a similar universalist spirit, though in a very different poetic form, where Walt might take a page, Emily Dickinson might take a line to express the same thought. So hear this. I think it's one of Elizabeth's favorites, mine too, maybe yours. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of eye, and for an everlasting roof, the gambrels of the sky, of visitors the fairest, for occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. It's that image from the last lines. Of course, the whole poem comes to it, but that image from the last lines, Emily spreading her hands as we could to gather paradise here, now, wherever we are, like Walt. And she too, though, expressed the universal experience of sorrow as well as joy and everything in between. There were these lines. They say that time assuages, she put that in quotes, time assuages. They say that time assuages. Time never did assuage. And actual suffering strengthens as sinews do with age. Time is a test of trouble, but not a remedy. If such it proved there was no malady. Those few lines for me are worth a lot of time and pondering. Well, moving forward in time by about a century, there's much that I could share from Robert Frost. You probably could too. This stays with me, including from his two most often quoted poems we heard this morning from the choir, Road Not Taken, and They're Stopping by Woods. But today I'm thinking of his poem, birches. Too long to read in its entirety this morning, but many of you will remember the beginning evokes this scene of a boy climbing to the top of a birch and then swinging down to the end, to the ground again. So it begins with that wonderful image, all of it leading to the wonderful last line, one could do worse than be a swinger of birches. I love that. One could do worse than be a swinger of birches. It's hard for me to articulate why that line sticks with me. Maybe it's an invitation to live a little more wildly. I mean, you know me, I'm so wild already, but it's an invitation to climb higher and swing and let go a little bit. Beautiful invitation to live a little differently from the usual down-to-earth ways. That's implied in the poem that the culture ordinarily expects. And perhaps this related to taking the road less traveled in that often misinterpreted but wonderful poem, but with more spirit. Yes, about the spirit of living, and maybe not all that different from yet another bunch of years later from Mary Oliver's often quoted line at the end of her poem, The Summer Day. Some of you may have heard a wonderful interview that was replayed this morning. You can still find it. Krista Tippett on Being replayed her interview with Mary Oliver. Anyway, Summer Day, the second part of the poem, follows her description of having been lying down in the grass, just watching a grasshopper. And then these last lines. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Yes, and again, yes, to the power and importance of attention, which Mary Oliver lifts up over and over again in her poetry. But also it's the invitation of a Whitman, a Dickinson, a Frost, calling us to attention. And doesn't everything flow from attention? Genuine attentiveness to one another, to the moment, to the beauty of a summer's day or spring's day, or to the suffering of another human being, whether our neighbor or someone in Ukraine or Afghanistan or Yemen, wherever it might be. And doesn't attention as a touchstone for how we might choose to live our one wild and precious life lead beyond attention to what we choose to do in the midst of these lives of beauty and suffering, joy and woe woven fine around us? Our poets are helpful in this regard as well. Not only calling us to attention, but imploring us, if only by implication, to action. How do we choose to live our precious lives? Or in what spirit do we choose to live? We heard Gary Snyder's recommendation in the reading, stay together, learn the flowers, go light. Elsewhere, he wrote this short poem, Steady, they say. Clambering up the rocks of a dry wash gully, warped sandstone by the San Juan River. Look north to stony mountains, shifting clouds and sun. Despair at how the human world goes down. Consult my old advisor. Steady, they say, today. Now, who are these old advisors? I've never met Gary Snyder to ask him. He might have said, I wouldn't have had to write the poem if I knew. Who are these old advisors the poet consults? Well, in our class on Gary Snyder a number of years ago, we had some really interesting conversation about this. One thing that hadn't occurred to me, how about the mountains as old advisors? Gary Snyder, a practicing Buddhist. Some of his old advisors may have been the old spiritual masters in texts, as they are mine. And I would add, of course, how about the poets? Consult my old advisor, steady, they say. And steady, it seems to me, cannot mean inactive. His first image was clambering up this rocky piece of mountain. Steady means holding steady in the midst of climbing, in the midst of challenges and difficulties, doing what needs to be done, just as you have to stay balanced, clambering up the rocks. So what I hear is stay or act as wisely as we can, as best we can, as we do what needs to be done, what it seems to us needs to be done. Don't give in to despair. Steady, they say. Consult your old advisors, whomever they might be. Further, with our national poet laureate, Joy Harjo, who wrote, "Be kind to all you meet along the way." And in the same poem, writing, "Don't forget, hold somebody's hand through the dark." And maybe dancing, as this poet suggests in another of her poems. After dancing all night in a circle, we realize that we are part of a larger sense of stars and planets dancing with us overhead, so that we all remember the sacredness of life. Remembering, too, with the poet we heard earlier, Yehuda Amichai, that peace in this sacred life we share, peace will more likely come not from the place where we are right, holier than thou and all that, judging but not budging, and not budging from our views, where flowers will never grow in the spring, he wrote, but rather peace will come from a place open to, as the poet wrote, open to love and doubts. Rumi, his place, his field beyond wrongdoing and right doing, where he invites us to meet. Finally, then, this, also from Joy Harjo, prose, not a poem, but from a poet. She wrote, "Everyone comes into this world with a job to do. I don't mean working for a company, corporation. No, we were all given gifts to share," she wrote. "Even the animals, even the plants, minerals, clouds, all beings." So, poetry for our lives. Maybe poets are not among everyone's old advisors. They are among mine, and I know many of you. Bringing condensed wisdom. I think that's another one of Elizabeth's favorite lines. Condensed wisdom, poetry, managing to engage both heart and mind in ways that can awaken us to the preciousness of life, the sacredness of every being, and then moving us to contribute with our unique gifts, our job to do in the world. It may seem modest, but it all accumulates, right? As we seek to stay together and seek in the spirit of Whitman and another of Joy Harjo's poems, which I can share another time, seeking to make of our enemies friends. Imagine the possibility. That is, after all, where to start, right? Imagine where to start, even or especially in this most worrisome of times. Imagine the possibility, and then, as best we can, steadily live towards the possibility. So may it be. Blessed be. And amen. We extinguish these flames easy to extinguish, but not the love with which they were lit, which we carry and pass from hand to hand, from heart to heart, from generation to generation. And this, the flame of the flaming chalice of our faith, again, easy to extinguish, but not our faith in love and truth, and the gifts of freedom. We carry these too, wherever we go. May we sing again together. Our hymn is number 128, For All That Is Our Life, number 128. May it be in that spirit that we live, sharing the blessings of our lives, that our lives might be a blessing to all life. Blessed be, so may it be, and amen.